Thank you, Teresa. I'm so amazed that there's so many people here from all over the country who I've met really on social media and a couple of times up in Washington, D.C., advocating for bills like Congressman Murphy's, who, when I called to say, hey, I'm going to do this conference in New Orleans, would you come and speak? Or even just, I didn't even ask people to come and attend. I said, will you come and speak? And so many people said, yeah, sure, Janet, no problem. When do you, and then all these people who we collaborate with on Facebook and so on and Twitter decided that they were going to come down for this. I didn't even ask them to speak. They just came, and it's just amazing to have so many wonderful friends and colleagues to learn. I learn so much from you all every day, and I hope other people are learning as well at this conference, and we'll continue to learn. You can find everyone. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Anyway, so I want to begin the next panel. My friend Cindy Schwartz, Miami-Dade Mental Health Project, is going to moderate this panel, and we're going to go until 5:15. The conference was going to be over at 5, but we ran a little late after lunch, and so I want to give everybody, ample opportunity to ask questions. And I'm going to invite folks up. So Dr. Michael Franczak is on his way. Arizona, Deborah Geesling, right behind him from Arizona, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you when they get up here. Martha Kegel, our very own Martha Kegel from Unity of Greater New Orleans. And we have Kerry Morrison, who is LA County, working on an amazing project. And I also want to invite Dr. Rosenberg up to this panel as well. Yeah, there he is. We spoke yesterday. Originally, Dr. Rosenberg wasn't going to be here in person, and so in the last minute, he was able to come, and I said, hey, seeing as you're going to be here, would you like to join us on one of our panels? And so I'm so happy that he agreed. Okay, so Cindy Schwartz, take it away. Thank you for doing that.
Okay, well, this has really been a phenomenal day, hasn't it? Right? And thank you, Janet, for inviting us all here today. Really a terrific experience. This is our housing panel, and we know that people can't move towards recovery without a roof over their head and a place to put their head down. So we're going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves to you. And we're going to ask that they take 7 minutes to share with us what their experience has been with housing. We'd like you to talk about what you know about housing and how housing can help this issue. So, with that, let's start with our introductions.
Oh, great. I'm actually just going to talk for a few seconds. It's a pleasure to be here again. Pleasure to show our film and have some of you see the book. My name is Ken Rosenberg. I'm an addiction psychiatrist in Manhattan with Cornell Weill Medical College, and also the author of a book and director of a film, Bedlam. In the book, we do talk a whole lot about housing and housing first, and some really important models that have come up. We also talk a lot about some things that I know personally as an addiction psychiatrist. That is, that when someone has untreated serious mental illness, but also has an addiction and is dealing with street drugs, that really, those things really need to be addressed. We saw last night in the film, and also we see in the book, a guy, Todd, who is struggling both with serious mental illness and addiction. And those things together become a synergistic vortex, which I think need to be addressed. So just want to say those few words. I'll be happy to chime in later, but real honor to be here.
Hi, my name is Deborah Geesling, and I'm a mother of an individual who has a serious mental illness. He's 27 years old. He has schizoaffective disorder. He's an amazing, amazing kid. I love him. That's why I'm here. It's just been very humbling. I just want to say, first of all, to hear the stories and hear the disparity between states. I live in a state and a county that had a lawsuit brought against it in the 80s, Arnold versus Sarnes. If you're not familiar with that lawsuit, please become familiar with that lawsuit. It brought just a foundation and a structure to our system, and one of those is assisted outpatient treatment. My son has benefited from assisted outpatient treatment for the past 7 years, and this is the first year he has not been placed back on court-ordered treatment and is gaining insight and taking his medications. He hasn't been hospitalized for those past 7 years, so I have a lot of experience in the system. I'm very grateful. I'm very passionate about advocacy, however. I'm very passionate about families. I think families do not realize the power that you have and the power that you have before the legislature when they hear your stories. And I'm going to speak to that, try to get this down to 7 minutes. But first of all, when my son had his first psychotic break at 18, my first experience into the system, which I had no idea about, he was taken by the police to an involuntary facility. And when I called down the next day to check on him, I had no idea what was going on. The gentleman on the phone said, "Ma'am, your son's a psychopath. Give him the number to a homeless shelter and pack his bags." Not only was that devastating, but that also eventually turned into fighting words for me. I thought, okay, this is what I'm up against. And that was my introduction into the system. For the first year, my son was placed on court-ordered treatment. He was able to live at home with us with the assistance of an ACT team, and that went well. But they let him off his medications after the first year, and he quickly decompensated. The next year, our family was living in a literal nightmare and crisis with continual hospitalizations, rehospitalizations, and quick release back to our home. Our family was drowning. We slept with our doors locked at night. My husband slept downstairs, I slept upstairs, and he thought, if something happens to one of us, one of us can make it and tell the story of what really happened here. By the end of that year, we said we can't do this anymore, and we found out when he was in the hospital that we said he can't come home. We can't do this. You've got to find him a place. Thank God, the first place we found for him was in a Mark Community Center home, which Dr. Mike was the CEO at the time. But within a few months, the state actually wanted to move him out of it because he was too symptomatic, and they said, well, he needs a higher level of care. There was no higher level of care for him. So my husband and I just dug our heels in and said, we're going to fight for this kid. We're going to go up against this, and we did. We used the media. We pulled out any stop. Legislators, I wrote to everybody, and Mark worked with us. And through some struggles, and we all became a team eventually, and Mark said, gosh, if Seth is failing, if Seth's not doing well, then what are we doing? What can we do to change and make him be a success? And so that really was kind of the basis and the foundation for a housing model that we created in Arizona. They created. We created. Thank God. I mean, he wasn't intimidated by the families that were struggling. It's just been, I'm so thankful. We call them the lighthouses, and what they are group homes that are staffed 24 hours. They are person-centered, not program-centered. That means if someone doesn't comply because of the symptoms of their illness, they still work with them. And that means if they have to be rehospitalized, if they are jailed picked up for a minor offense, they don't lose their spot. They're basically paying rent. They're renters there. That's their room. And it's just, and so to back up a little bit, how much time do I have? Okay. Well, I just want to very briefly to back up. What thrust me into this? I went to NAMI groups. I went to all kinds of groups in the beginning. Who's working on this? Come on, I can't be the only one that's faced with this madness. And I was really kind of shocked that NAMI was not really active, advocating. And in fact, they kind of opposed some of the things that we eventually worked on. And so I realized I need a beachhead here. How can we get in here? And so I knocked on doors, and I found the legislators that listened to me. And there was this one legislator, Nancy Bartow, who I knew she cared. So I kept going back, and I kept knocking. And but I couldn't go empty-handed. I had to go with a plan. Like, what are we going to do? What am I asking her to do? You know, I'm trying to get her attention. So we started with a resolution. I know DJ mentioned resolutions before. They don't have teeth. But what the resolution did was it was the Caregiver Bill of Rights, and we wrote out our problems and what we felt like was our rights as caregivers and family members. And what that gave us was a platform in front of all of our legislators that we could go and testify as family members. And this resolution passed unanimously. Along with that, though, the legislators started noticing, and people started coming out and talking, and more things started passing over the next few years. We passed a bill having to do with HIPAA. Our HIPAA law was not even, it wasn't even up to standard with the federal law. So we addressed that. We brought in the stakeholders, and they had to answer to the legislators. So it started a communication, and it actually led to some. You know, some people think, well, a resolution, big deal. It was a big deal, because this past year in our legislature, more family members joined together. The Goldstein family, the Dunseith family, whose children are living in a Lighthouse group home. We passed a bill to do a secured residential setting. Has never been done in Arizona. We were able to allocate $3.5 million to get this done. This was a handful of family members, and we had some other stakeholders that came on board, mental health lawyers, and we decided we're just going to focus, and we focused on this one thing, and we got it done. And I say all that because I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people that have done lots of work for years, but I really saw every time we went before that legislature with a focused and targeted goal that those legislators are not going to vote no when they hear these moms and these sisters tell your stories in front of them, and you have a goal. Every single thing, almost, except for the budget, we had some issues, partisan budget issues, has passed unanimously. And it's not because I'm a super advocate. I don't even have a college degree. It's our stories. And so that's all I want to say.
A focus and a targeted goal. I think those are really important, a very important message. Dr. Mike?
Okay, talking more about Arizona, Deborah already brought up the Arnold v. Sarn case, which is a 30-year-old lawsuit. In Arizona, our legislation had rights for individuals with serious mental illness to receive treatment. They just didn't fund any treatment. So you might have had a right, but you had no ability to get it. So what we needed, the Arnold v. Sarn lawsuit, while it was considered a class action lawsuit, and I came in after the settlement was reached, it's actually a cash action lawsuit. And if you don't have enough cash in the system, a class action lawsuit can bring all kinds of funding. So we got a bunch of money, and the funds began pouring in slowly. And in one of the parts, we asked for housing. Now, today I must have heard, and I should have counted, I probably heard the importance of housing 400 or 500 times, right? Right. My experience in doing this is we got money for housing. Housing is composed of bricks and mortar. And what we did was we bought houses, we rented houses, and unless those houses had the appropriate supports for the people that were going to be there, they were going to be evicted very quickly because they're not going to follow rules or don't have the functional skills. So to me, housing has got to be more than the bricks and mortar. If it's just a house, it's going to provide shelter. It's not going to provide the support a person needs to succeed. So we started building supports that go into housing. As Deborah mentioned, sometimes that support's 24 hours. Sometimes it's once a day. Sometimes it's once a week to see that you cooked your meals. For individuals who are particularly challenged, we found that it had to be almost 24 hours. And with that kind of support, we had a sort of a 92% success rate for staying in those kinds of settings for a year. That means we also had to realize, and some providers still don't, that people with serious mental illness are going to have cyclic issues that occur, that they might have to be hospitalized for periods of time. Well, many providers said, well, you're gone, I got to fill that bed. I got to get a head in that bed so you're not coming back. So that stuck the person in the hospital. We realized that we had to keep that unit. You paid rent, you pay 30%, basically the HUD rent, 30% of your income. For some people, that was nothing. So we kept the units. Moving forward, I then moved on to, I was originally the director of the Arizona Department of Health Clinical Services in behavioral health, sorry for that term, mental health, right? I am now the director of population health for an agency called Partners in Recovery, and we serve 9,000 individuals with a serious mental illness in Maricopa County, which is Phoenix and all the surrounding areas, right? So, one of the things I do now is I look at the most challenged individuals as population health director. I get lists of people who are going in and out of hospitals, going in and out of emergency rooms, going in and out of jails, and we get that data, we bring it in, and then we try to analyze it using, I'm a behavioral psychologist, so I look at the functional reasons why these things are happening. These folks we call our familiar faces. We don't call them our frequent flyers, that seems rude, but they're people we know pretty well. So the familiar face population that we have identified, we've had some individuals who've been to emergency rooms 150 times in the year, okay? Or they've been to hospitals 20 times, in and out, in and out, in and out. So when you look at, and I just discovered there's a new word that's very popular called granular. So when I look at the granular level of the data, and to you and I who would think like, man, I don't want to be sitting in emergency rooms, we try to examine, okay, exactly why do you do that? We do what's known as a root cause analysis and ask why, until we get to the reason of why. And what we found in our analysis of batches of these individuals is many of the reasons are social determinant reasons. Many are, Arizona gets pretty hot. And if you don't have a good place, an apartment that has good air conditioning, or you're homeless, you want to get out of the heat. Our libraries have started to call us and say, we don't want all these people sitting in our library all day. So they choose emergency rooms. Or we get a little cold in the winter, I'm cold. Or I need something to eat. And some of the hospitals, will provide you with a sandwich or lunch. And I sat around with a group of our familiar faces one day, and they were talking about hospitals like it was Travago or one of those. One was saying, well, this hospital has the best pool. This hospital has the best meal. And then some people are going there because they're lonely and sad. And they need some companionship. There are some people, Dr. Schwartz or Ms. Schwartz, that are going there because of an untreated mental illness or refusal to engage in treatment, or, as Ralph said, what's your term, Ralph? Refractory, or something like that. Yeah. So what we try to do is, okay, how can the person get that need met without having to go to a hospital or an emergency room? There are lots of appropriate reasons for going to a hospital. We are not trying to stamp out hospitalization. But if a person is going there for reasons other than psychiatric and would not meet medical necessity, we need to have other resources available for them to get that need, to cool off during the day, to get a meal, to meet some people, the whole thing. So one of the things I saw, and it's been really inspiring today. I live this I've done this for 40 years, 40 hours a week or more. But I really heard some great things going on here. And I really heard some passionate stories that remind me of why I'm doing this, So, but one thing I thought I'd tell you is, how many of you have heard there's a federal program called Money Follows the Person. How many of you have heard of that program? A lot of you, okay? Guess where the money followed the people from the hospital? It followed them to the jail. That's where the money went. It didn't go to provide the services that need to prevent that kind of thing. Now, the worst thing I see is we look at, I have a generally revolving 150 cases where I work with teams. And I look at the data and I say, okay, they went to the hospital, 10 times. We tried to do this. We got them to this. We connected them with this. This is working. That's not working. And I keep tracking the data to make sure they're doing well. And sometimes I'm looking at the data and I said, man, we had a miracle. They haven't had any of this happen in 3 or 4 months. And then the teams tell me that's because they're in jail. So,
Dr. Mike, tell us.
Yes.
How many beds do you serve? I mean, how many people do you serve in this program? What's the implementation?
Oh, well, this was a program I had started previously, and it's a small program. I think we have residential programs, supported housing programs, and then we also have these lighthouse programs, so not that many. This is my best answer.
That sounds like a lot more than a lot of other communities, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, hi, my name is Kerry Morrison. I am not a clinician. I am not a family member. I kind of fit into a different category bucket. I'm represented the business community in Hollywood. I ran a business improvement district for 20 years, and Los Angeles is the epicenter of homelessness. And about 3 or 4 years, well, more like 4 years ago, we created a list of people in Hollywood called the Hollywood Top 14. And these were the most severely mentally ill people who were languishing on our streets, in some cases dying. And we began as a small team of people to try to identify, why is it so hard to help people with severe mental illness? So that became my family, because we know those people. They are familiar faces. And as we began to try to help them, it opened my eyes to the dysfunctionality of our mental health system. So why am I here? Because Barksdale said something really profound this morning, but he gave credit to a general in Australia, and I Googled this guy. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I'll explain to you in a moment that I had a study fellowship for a couple of years that gave me an opportunity to spend 2 years looking for a better way to address serious mental illness. And I think I found something that I'm going to share with you. And I gave my board of directors last summer 6 months notice. I said, I cannot any longer accept this standard. I'm going to quit my job. You need to find someone to run the Hollywood bid, and I'm going to jump into this space full time. I'm still unemployed, but I'm actually loving this. And so DJ, who is my mentor, and he is the great connector, the New York Post approached me last week and asked me to write an op-ed. And I thought I would just read this to you because I only have 7 minutes, and it's only 740 words, because as you know, as Mark Twain said, if I had more time, I would have written something shorter. So it took me a long time to condense this into 740 words. But this is where I am landing right now. Until February, for 22 years, I managed a business improvement district on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a top destination for global tourists that bears witness to our country's abandonment of people struggling with severe and untreated mental illness. Daily, I'd see the faces of shocked foreign tourists walking past ragged people huddled in doorways or sitting half naked on a bus bench yelling at traffic. They'd come to visit one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, only to be assaulted by the heartbreaking sight of human misery playing out on one of the world's most famous streets. These people were homeless not because of, these little ads pop up. These people were homeless not because of rising housing costs or losing a job, but on account of untreated mental illness, in some cases exacerbated by substance abuse. The American mental health system is broken beyond repair. To tweak or fix around the edges is as futile as filling potholes on a highway to nowhere. It is a system that values institutional preservation and risk management ahead of meeting the human needs of those it is supposed to serve. It marginalizes families and friends who are in a position to help. It thrives on regulations, and it shackles the discretion of workers who, given the opportunity, would lead with the common sense instincts guided by their hearts. In this system, fear rules the day. Fear of violating privacy laws, fear of violating someone's civil right to sit in their own feces on the sidewalk, fear of providing desperately needed services that might be ineligible for Medicaid reimbursement. We are afraid of the very people we are expected to serve. 3 years ago, I received a 2-year study fellowship to research a better path forward for caring for people with severe mental illness. For the first year, I searched in the US, and though I found bright spots, many of them in this room, places, programs, and heroic people who tried to MacGyver human-centered programs into our system, the system ultimately wins. Then I went overseas to a remarkable city where fear is replaced with radical hospitality, a place where the best human instincts of staff are liberated to connect with the users of their mental health system as fellow human beings. The World Health Organization has recognized the system in Trieste, Italy, as a global best practice of mental health care. It's built upon managing the aspirations of the whole person, tapping into family support, facilitating social inclusion, and believing in the human right to a purposeful life. After closing their 1,200-bed asylum in 1980, the citizens of Trieste created a community-based system of care to integrate people back into their neighborhoods. Their culture of mutual respect and protection of human dignity is breathtaking. This is the system promised after deinstitutionalization in America, but never actualized. In Trieste, the police are not the first responders to a mental health crisis. Psychiatrists come to the scene, and situations are diffused with less trauma to all involved. Involuntary hospitalization is rare. The city, with a population of 240,000, has only 6 psychiatric hospital beds, and they are in an unlocked ward where attending staff wear plain clothes. The Community Mental Health Center collaborates with its users to create life plans that lay out goals for work and social activities. Individuals whose severe mental illness precludes independent living may reside in congregate housing with 24/7 care. Unlike the institutional feel of our adult residential facilities, these places are home-like. Residents are encouraged to participate in neighborhood clubs, and there are house chores and pets, super important. Last month, I returned from an international conference in Trieste, joined by representatives from 44 countries. Speakers shared their experiences pursuing the Italian-inspired model on several continents. Trieste is a pilgrimage destination because it serves as a reminder of what is possible for our fellow human beings. Los Angeles County is now collaborating with the Trieste system. We're seeing what we can learn, seeking to try something bold and new. On a visit last fall, colleagues from Trieste toured Los Angeles' ground zero for human suffering, Skid Row. The extent to which we've allowed people to deteriorate on our streets far exceeds anything you will see in Trieste, where there is virtually no homelessness. One psychiatrist told me, "You may think you closed the asylum in America, but we just walked through an open-air asylum. It's time to stop filling the potholes. Let's pave the new road forward." So that... One of the most exciting things about being unemployed right now is that I didn't have to ask anyone for permission to write this. I've been asked by the Department of Mental Health multiple times to come work for them, and I would not be able to write that. So I'm finding my voice, and as I've been listening to everything people have been saying today about tweaking the system, fixing potholes on a road to nowhere, I think what we need to try to do in Los Angeles, and this is not going to be easy, and I'm going to push for it, is though we have received a grant from the state, from the Mental Health Services Act Innovations Fund. They've awarded a $116 million grant to do a 5-year pilot inspired by the Trieste model in Hollywood. I can see where it will constantly try to be co-opted by our county or co-opted by, our service providers or others to just say, let's just tweak and let's just try to do it a little bit better. But no, I think we actually need to create a protected biosphere pilot to make it a true pilot, to say, let's go back to 1980. If we had done this right, what would it look like? Protect that, learn from it, and I'm committing to you today that if we don't do it that way, I won't be involved with it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I have to tell you, I just read this yesterday. So it's really great to hear you read it again, because it really has so much meaning. So thank you so much for that, Kerry. Thank you. And we're going to move on to Martha. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've implemented housing.
Thank you. I'm Martha Kegel. I'm the director of Unity of Greater New Orleans. We're a nonprofit organization that oversees a partnership of governmental and nonprofit agencies all working together to end homelessness by providing housing and services. And I want to thank Janet for inviting me, and apologize in advance that I'm going to have to leave right at 5 because I have something else I have to be at. Scheduled myself too tight today. So housing first. What is housing first? That's what Janet asked me to address. It is a evidence-based practice that has been largely responsible for why, until the past 3 years, homelessness had been going down nationally, and why we have achieved quite a measure of success in New Orleans. We've actually reduced homelessness here by 90% since 2007. Remember, we had a little event called Katrina that caused an explosion in homelessness because 70% of our housing was destroyed here. And we have successfully used housing first as a technique to address that. So housing first is basically the idea that you accept people as they are, with all of their problems, all of their severe problems, having severe mental illness, being non-compliant with treatment, not taking their medications, using substances, cursing at you, spitting at you, whatever it is that they're doing, you accept them as they are and you provide housing and services simultaneously. And the services are really aimed at keeping the person housed. Remember, this is primarily a technique for reducing homelessness, but obviously a big part of it is trying to get that person voluntarily to accept services that will allow them to live the highest quality life they can live. So there's case managers that are very actively working, not requiring the person to go visit them in their office, but going to them in their home. First, going to them on the street and bringing them into housing, apartment, and then this person works really hard to get them to the psychiatrist, get them to the doctor, get them to substance use treatment, but it's all voluntary. So the person has to be very good at motivational enhancement to motivate the person to do those things. But also reuniting them with family. Oftentimes there are really, really major schisms between the person and their family. Getting them into some productive activity. It could be volunteer work, it could be paid employment part-time, full-time, but doing everything they can to help that person be successfully housed. Maintaining a positive relationship with their landlord being key, paying the rent being key. And so we apply for and bring to the community federal grants that provide rent subsidies and case management services, primarily aimed at people with serious disabilities, mental illness as well as physical illness, and getting them off the street and keeping them there. And there is an army pretty much in every community of case managers who are working pretty much outside the public spotlight to keep people housed who have been rescued off the streets years, months ago, and may be their permanent client. These are people who would have been institutionalized for life 50 years ago. But now the homeless system ends up being the ones that are keeping people housed in the community. And this housing first technique has very excellent success rates across the country, and it's been really responsible for why we have been able to significantly reduce the numbers of people with serious physical and mental illness who have been long-term homeless. We don't have nearly as many people who've been homeless out there for over a year as we did just 10 years ago. Those numbers have gone, way down around the country, but also in New Orleans, we've had a significant reduction in that. And so I can say that while this may seem completely non-controversial to many people in the audience, it is a total sea change for how we used to do things. When I first took my job in 2003, previously I was a lawyer running a homeless legal advocacy project at Legal Services. And I mostly did SSI work. And I had the good sense to know that my job as a lawyer shouldn't really be over when I got the client their disability benefits, but I really needed to make sure they were using their benefits to get housing. But I had never heard of housing first. And one of my very last clients as a lawyer was a guy who I will call Anthony, not his real name, but he had schizophrenia. He had been homeless, living on the streets for over 30 years when I met him. He had left home as a teenager. And he had so many problems, it's hard to even tick them all off, but he had crack addiction. He was a severe alcoholic. He had borderline intellectual functioning. He couldn't even read. And he had diabetes. I was actually most worried about the diabetes because he was completely unable to monitor his sugar out there on the street. And I really worried that he was going to die. And I referred him to what I thought was one of the better homeless housing programs in our community. But then after I took my new job, I saw him back out on the street. And I'll tell you, when I was pulling his records in the course of representing him, it was shocking. He had been, in the prior year, before I had gotten him his benefits, he had been taken to Charity Hospital on average twice a month for usually violent behavior related to his schizophrenia and or his substance use. It was never really clear which one. They were all so closely connected. And so he would be taken there and typically kept for a few days and then dumped back out on the street. And when I pulled his jail records, I found out that he had had in the prior year 26 separate arrests, all for municipal violations related to being homeless. He was arrested for obstructing the sidewalk. He was arrested for public urination, public intoxication, criminal trespass, which is actually on public property. If you're trespassing on public property, you can be arrested for that. He was arrested for all manner of things. And again, he typically was kept for just a few days, and then they would dump him back out on the street. And I may be a liberal, but when I looked at this, I thought, my God, as a taxpayer, I'm just thinking, what is the cost of this? Like, how crazy is this that we have been just, having this man just constantly in and out of the hospital and jail? And so when I saw Anthony back out on the street, and obviously this latest housing placement didn't work at all, soon after that I found out that we actually had a program in our Continuum of Care, our homeless coalition, that had actually started something called Housing First, which I had never heard of at that time. And they were actually deliberately looking for the clients who were the most in need, who were chronically homeless, who had substance use disorders, who had severe mental illness, non-compliant with everything, and they were and had been homeless for a long time, and they were actually seeking out those clients and prioritizing them, which is totally different from every other program. Every other program was requiring sobriety before they would let you in, was requiring, compliance, had all kinds of rules. If you violated any rules, you'd be kicked out. And needless to say, hardly anybody on the street ever got housed under our old system. So when I found out about this new program, and I had just seen Anthony out on the street, I called the social worker for that program, and I said, Cynthia, and I have to give a shout out to Jefferson Parish Human Services Authority because they're the ones who pioneered this program, by the way. I said, Cynthia, you're going to be sorry you took this call today because I have this client and I'm really worried about him. And to tell you the truth, this was really a Hail Mary on my part. Probably I was just trying to assuage my guilt. I didn't want Anthony to die. I didn't think that anyone could house him. He was kind of the textbook case of somebody who you would think just couldn't possibly be housed. He didn't even want to be housed. He would tell me that he liked going to jail.
So what happened to Anthony?
So I said, here's some places where he typically sleeps. Good luck finding him, and good luck getting him housed because he doesn't really want to be housed. And I didn't hear anything from her for a long time. I didn't expect ever to hear anything from her. But about 6 weeks later, she calls me and she says, we have Anthony. We've had him for a month. He's clean and sober.
Wow.
I'm like, oh my God. Well, that didn't totally stick. But in the next year and a half, up until Hurricane Katrina, in that year and a half of being housed, first of all, he kept his apartment neat as a pin. I don't know how that happened because he hadn't lived in an apartment since he was a teenager. But he stayed off of crack. He went back to drinking, maybe a little too much. But he managed to never be hospitalized. He was never taken again to Charity Hospital. He was arrested one more time. The case manager went to court, got the charges dropped. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was damn near close. I was like, oh my God, we have got to take this to scale. If they can house Anthony, they can house virtually anyone. And so that is what we have done since then, and it's been very successful. Now, there are some times when we need to take someone to the hospital first, and oftentimes after they're housed, as you said, oftentimes people occasionally do need to be hospitalized again, but this technique has been a lifesaver for so many people. And the only problem is that we don't have enough resources. And I'm just going to end by saying that this is a time for everyone to advocate. Okay, right now, the federal budget for the next year has not been approved. Congress is operating on a continuing resolution. You need to call your U.S. Senator and your U.S. Representative, and you need to tell them to allocate more money for mental health, and in particular, since I'm on the housing side of things, ask them for $3 billion is the request being made by the National Alliance to End Homelessness for homeless housing programs, which include permanent supportive housing.
Great.
So it has the services piece in, and $24 billion is being asked for housing choice vouchers. And what I think we all would agree on is that for people with disabilities, mental and physical, housing should be a human right.
Yes.
It is absolutely essential to people's health. People die. There are research studies that show that people die from being out on the street. And as one physician who works with the homeless in San Francisco told me, he would love more than anything else if he could prescribe housing as a treatment.
Right.
Because he says, in his opinion, it is as important as any medication.
And
to
you know,
people's, to
this is
people's
thank you so much for these comments, because it's a perfect segue into where do we go next? What are the barriers that stop us as a community to find housing for people with mental illnesses, and why have jails become the place where people live now? So let's talk about that, panel. What are the barriers? And if you had all the money in the world, what would you do to develop housing for this population?
So I'll just jump in. You know, in Los Angeles, obviously, we're at a place of humanitarian crisis. We don't have enough housing for all sorts of people, and I'm going to just challenge the housing first model a little bit from the way I've understood it, because we are really promoting permanent supportive housing and building it in Los Angeles. But I would argue that a portion of this population could not live independently in permanent supportive housing, because the way I've seen it, you know, there's often not 24-hour care, or maybe it's just a property manager downstairs. You have to be able to buy your food, cook your food. Where I see a lot of people ending up in California is in what we would call the board and care system or adult residential facilities, 2 people to a room, 24-hour care. I mean, they're not great, but they're closing at a fast clip in California because the daily reimbursement rate is $34 a day for people to provide 24-hour care, food, laundry, bedding, etc. So I'm so interested to hear about what you've developed and some of the other ideas today. My hope is that we could come up with a new kind of housing that is more congregate living, shared housing, family feeling, where you have chores, you wake up and you have a sense of purpose. You know, right now you sit in a board and care, you smoke cigarettes all day because you're not allowed to have a chore because of some ACLU lawsuit in the 70s where people were exploited if they had to peel potatoes. Well, that's ridiculous. Where there should be pets. There's a therapeutic value to having dogs and cats around. The family feel of reducing social isolation and combating loneliness. We don't have that kind of baked into our federal housing policy, so I've taken note of some of the folks who are trying these innovative ideas here, and I think we need to maybe come up with a new model that we would push for.
Thank you.
I think that we should make sure that any housing is placed in neighborhoods that are safe and secure. I've seen people being placed back into environments where you know they're going to fail because the whole neighborhood is either drug infested or problematic. It's sort of like San Francisco at one point sent everyone to the Tenderloin, which was like you were saying, an open air hospital setting. So safe neighborhoods.
I agree, actually, with both of you. I think we need the government tends to do one size fits all. It's, you know, we had transitional housing, then we did move to housing first, and the federal government cut out funding for transitional housing. Well, there's a continuum here of people that don't fit into those things, so we need to have the whole continuum. And I agree with, I know from experience, Mark has bought houses. A lot of the objections is, well, we can't do it because of NIMBY. Well, my son is living in one of the most prosperous cities in our state in a very nice house, and they just went in and bought the house, and they legally can do it. Federal laws, they're protecting them, and they're doing great because it's managed well, and there's staff there. The police aren't coming because there's staff issues. They're just like part of the neighborhood, And we can do this. We definitely can do it.
And I have to agree with you that there needs to be a full continuum of care. Not everyone is ready to move into a home and, just hope for the best. I think there needs to be a continuum where we start helping people along and treating them with dignity and respect while we're teaching them skills to live independently. So I couldn't agree with you more. In Miami, we're seeing the rise in rents is astronomical, and people can't afford to live in Miami, and I know that's happening in big cities across the nation. And this whole idea of $34 a day, what we used to have were assisted living facilities. We don't have those anymore. So it's getting very, very bad. People are staying longer in jail waiting for residential treatment or waiting for any type of housing. And in order to be diverted, you need to have an address. So we're all being squeezed very tightly here.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that, while I think that, I love the Italian model that you talked about, and I do think there are definitely some people that need some other approaches. When you're talking about policy and taking things to scale, there is no doubt that housing first in apartments with case managers works well for the majority of chronically homeless people with severe disabilities. The research is out there, the data is out there.
Right.
It's very successful. So I don't think you want to do anything that would undo any of that.
No, I think
just
it's
that you
part
gotta
of the
add some extra
continuum.
stuff,
Right.
some
Right.
extra options to it,
Absolutely.
which I would fully agree with.
Right.
But I don't think that you're necessarily opposed to housing
No.
first, because it's
No.
been, it has made such a difference to people who were completely excluded from HUD
Absolutely.
permanent supportive housing prior to, back in the early 2000s.
I think
prior to
it's
Right.
I think
housing.
it's part of the continuum, and there may be different solutions for everyone, and we need to develop individualized plans. And I think we're going to open this up for comments and questions now.
So one thing I run into with my ACT team is we have when you talk about group homes or some sort of community living, there is nothing in the state of Louisiana at all. The group homes, and I really think that's stretching it, is a couple random people who have no training at all, who literally open a house and people pay. Every group home that I know of has bed bugs, there's holes in walls, everything like that. And so it comes down to categories of people who open group homes, of somebody who feels a calling, who's got no training, but says, I'm going to at least provide something. And then there's some other people who maybe don't have the best intentions. One thought that I've had, and I'd love to see an idea and hear about y'all's perspective, is some sort of large building where people can have housing. And the pushback I get is, what about stigma? We don't want to lump everybody into the same housing. And it goes back to your thought of, well, people are on the street, stigma exists. I love the Rosa Keller building that, just to describe it, has, I don't know how many, 100, 200 apartments in it.
Just 60.
Oh gosh, 60 apartments in it, but they have a social worker's office. They have coming and going is limited. Have y'all seen programs where, say, an ACT team like model exists within the building and can both get fund, but also actually have people on site? And that might be kind of what y'all are describing in your own states.
Well, we, in some of our ACT teams in Arizona, have houses associated with them, but it's only 3, 4, 5 people. We did not. I know New York has some locations that are much larger, but advocates are saying some people are, saying that's creating a mental health ghetto.
And I guess my response is, we have mental health ghettos on the streets, and so at least if there's a central location where we can provide services where people can go to get food, to get housing, and then get the services.
Makes sense to me.
I don't know. Okay. It's funding, right? That's
Funding and licensure. I mean,
No,
I
there
don't
are
know
only
how you
2
license.
licensed group homes in Louisiana.
Well,
that I know of. There's no licensure here.
Well, there's
Yeah.
no licensing, so
I-
okay, sky's the limit.
I think we might be,
For how many beds? So
I think we might actually be encountering a bit of a gap in this housing continuum that we're talking about, because the only shared living that exists in California are small adult residential facilities, ARFs, board and cares, and then there's really nothing else. And we know there's something better that exists out there. Where there's a lot of frustration right now in LA with our housing crisis is that the mayor and others will keep saying, we just need more housing. And now there's this controversy about how many of our chronically homeless population suffers from mental illness. The official continuum of care number was 29%, and everybody said, well, that's way too small. It feels much bigger. So the LA Times just 2 weeks ago looked at some other data that said it might be closer to 70%. And that actually feels more accurate. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And the reason why that number is important to isolate, because it's frustrating to hear politicians say, oh, we just need more housing to address our homeless population. For many of our homeless population, yes, but for a cohort of people, perhaps a very small cohort with severe mental illness, we need some other kind of housing that I don't think exists right now.
That's why I would say the families, I'm going to go back to this and harp on this, get in front of your legislators and tell your stories. They need to hear this. I live in a very conservative state, and you would think that they wouldn't be open to letting loose of the purse strings. That was the complete opposite. Everyone was so supportive, and we found out a good percentage of legislators had a family member who had SMI. So you've got to start that relationship.
So I'm Jules Edwards, and I'm a judge in Lafayette, and we have a Familiar Faces program in Lafayette. Housing is a big issue. I'm very intrigued by this housing first. I've heard that before, and I have a question about that. But first, I want to have a quick comment. You know, community to me is very important. Rights without obligations, kind of problematic, all right? And so, but my question is, with the what support is available for landlords who experience property destruction when a person decompensates and tears the toilet out and throws it against the face wall? What is that, just a loss to the landlord? And if that's a loss, how do you recruit landlords to participate in this?
Well, many communities that have more money than ours actually have a special fund to deal with situations where there may be more destruction than what the HUD regulations allow be paid. But there, you can offer an extra month's rent if there is evidence of destruction within the HUD guidelines. But we have not, despite the fact that some tenants, are, destructive, oftentimes because of mental illness, most likely. We have not had problems getting landlords to participate in our program. And it's because of the fact that not only do we offer, a fairly high rent, but the fact that there's a case manager that the landlord can call. I think every landlord would love to have a case manager for their clients that don't have that, So the fact that the case manager is visiting the client in the home, hopefully the case manager spots when there's damage like that, and it can be timely dealt with. And that includes making sure that the client is getting the appropriate treatment to stop that from happening.
Our staff very similar. We have a fund to pay for excessive damage. But before somebody is placed in a location, we make sure we have a relationship with the landlord and that they trust us. And depending upon the market out there, some landlords are really hungry, and then sometimes they're not hungry at all. And then some landlords have gone to crime-free, drug-free policies, which create some barriers for some of our people to get in. But it's always working the market with housing specialists, like your folks probably do.
But I think that the judge makes a really good point. In order to motivate landlords to accept this target group, it needs to be attractive in some way. Because they're taking a risk, and there needs to be some kind of compensation.
I think it also brings up an important point, kind of medical point, of the asygnosia, of so many people not knowing they're sick. And I see that, in the cases that we've been following in the book and film, for people who are vulnerable, they're more willing to get involved in a Project 50 or, like the Los Angeles project that Kerry's talking about, which has proven not only to save lives, but save taxpayer dollars. For the people who are younger and are, more acute, their symptoms are more acute, their awareness of their disease is, they're not vulnerable, and they are unaware of how sick they are. I think it's very hard, and that's where an assisted outpatient program, the kind of work that you're doing, is really important, has to be done with that, because I know children of billionaires who are stuck in jail or living and dying on the streets, many of them, friends, and in my case, my sister had a home, but the home became kind of a wreck. So it's not just a housing issue, and it depends on where you're at in the process of the disease, and I think that the kind of leverage care element needs to be brought into the housing discussion, especially when you're talking about people early in the disease and the most acute phases of the disease. Once people are vulnerable, in my experience at least, they're more willing to participate in a housing model.
And I think it speaks to the whole issue of people need supportive services to go along with it. Permanent supportive services and housing go hand in hand. Did you want to? Okay.
You pre-answered.
Telepathically, I got your message. That's just a joke.
It's me again. So my brother Paul really needed long-term care. He was permanently disabled from his mental disabilities. Schizophrenia coupled with probably brain damage from PCP and LSD use, drug abuse. And so what I really want to know is, how can we model this so that we're doing a proper assessment of what the needs are of the person, not only in this moment of time, but possibly permanently. One of the things that we dealt with all the time after Paul was released was this one track towards living in his own apartment, which I want that to be stopped. We need to stop that train. We need to have little decision boxes certain periods of time. Does he still have anosognosia? Is he still unable to cook his own meals, make a cup of coffee, wash his face, brush his teeth, all that things, if Paul had teeth. And we're placing them in where we hope they can live, and not where they can live. And we're not always looking at, and people tell me, well, aren't you going to give up hope for recovery? And no, I don't want to do that on a large scale. What I want to do is be realistic on an individual scale. For some, and basically about 25% of people with schizophrenia cannot live on their own. And it's very sad, but we have to admit it, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to plan for it. And we're not doing any of those things right now, and that's what I would hope that our new model would do.
Yeah, that's basing it. You're going to have a continual, a treatment team like they seem to have at Fountain House. What did you say? I'm sorry I keep picking on you, Ralph, but you're easy target there. What did you say, a continual, lifelong?
Memberships for life, and basically you have residences that you take care of people who can't make it. Not everyone can live independently, at least at this point in time.
It's a continual relationship with the treatment team, psychiatric care, medications change, people, you know.
And the family.
The effects wear out. You got to have that kind of continual relationship with a treatment team. As far as Agnes Synovia, which I can't hardly pronounce, can anyone really pronounce that word?
Anosognosia.
There we go.
Practice it for
That term, I don't think we have to say that just because you have that condition doesn't mean you can't function well in the community, because
No.
we could probably all have agnosynovia right now, because none of us think we're mentally ill, right? So can we function appropriately regardless of whether we don't think or know that we have mental illness?
No, my point is though, just it's a barrier to treatment and housing early on. But Cheryl, go ahead. Go to the.
So I'm not sure that this is applicable to all other states. I mean, in the state of New York, we have two designations. So supportive housing is basically where they're going to be meeting with, in our case, it's a social practitioner, but otherwise it would be a case manager at least once a month, if not more often. Supported ED is basically people living independently, and they're going to be seen like quarterly just to do a touch and have a progress note. Again, forgive my ignorance, I'm not sure that is the same in every state, but in the state of New York, that's the differentiating factor between support and supportive. The Medicaid pays for that, and it's pretty nice. It's somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 a month for the support that goes with that individual in a supportive apartment. And it could be anywhere from two people living in the apartment, independent rooms sharing bathroom and kitchen, or it could be even more than that, depending on the size of the apartment. One of our biggest challenges in New York City, as you could all imagine, just like in San Francisco and other Miami and other expensive towns, it's not about anything other than real estate costs.
How much did you say that was?
For
That Medicaid
For
paid?
supportive, it's somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 a month per person. But you have to get those beds designated as such. And if I'm not mistaken, I would have to ask Beth, our housing director. I think we have about 100 of those designated slots.
I was just going to say that I think one of the takeaways from Janet's conference is that we've hit upon a gap, a negative space here that we have to fill with respect to a new housing model, not only for people with severe mental illness, but in America today, we are holding on to this notion that everyone's entitled to an apartment, right? I always say in Los Angeles, if we put two people into an apartment, we could double the rate at which we're trying to house people. More people are falling into homelessness every day than are being housed, despite heroic efforts. Our children are not living alone in apartments. They're home with us, or they're with roommates. That's the nature of this very challenging housing market right now. And there's some innovative things beginning to happen in housing. There's a place being built in Hollywood. I know there's a certain name for it, but there's common space, a common barbecue pit, a common kitchen, common, TV room, and everybody has their own little bedroom. I think not everyone has their own bathroom. There's some shared bathrooms, kind of like a dorm on steroids, but we all made it in college, sharing a bathroom. And one of the benefits that seem to be accruing from this kind of housing is companionship. Loneliness and isolation in America for everybody is a problem. And we've talked about, as many times as we've talked about housing today, we've talked about community and the need for community and the need for social engagement. So we might need to start to be thinking about new housing models that are going to fit into our dense urban environments that also are going to serve this particular cohort of people.
Right.
Good idea.
I would just say you might want to check out Clearview in Frederick, Maryland. Clearview provides supportive housing and group homes, small. I think there are maybe 8 to 10 people. Mayo Clinic and others around the country, insurance companies are actually asking Clearview to come to their states, and they're paying them because it's cheaper for the insurance companies to have their clients in Clearview than it is for them to keep cycling through the emergency room. So Clearview is a great model to look at.
It's great, thank you.
We've been in group homes, we've been in local housing, and it just doesn't work. And it has not worked for our son. It has not worked. And now that he's been in the state hospital for a couple years, and they keep pushing us out. They want us out. He's stable. And I won't let him do it because I do not want him to decompensate, to go somewhere, not have something to do, not have any kind of life. Right now he has a job. He goes out and volunteers. He's doing so well for the first time in 16 years that I do not want to lose that. And I'm going to toot Fountain House's horn. We flew up there to see, because when he was in an apartment by himself, he was so isolated, he only had us. So I had read about it. So we flew up and visited. Then we went down to Greenville, South Carolina to Gateway. They are now doubling in size. They brought the property across. They are taking care of people so well. Then we went to Nova in Carborough, North Carolina, and then Adventure House in Shelby, North Carolina. So we went to 4 different fountain houses in 3 different states. They are working. They give these people, they would give my son something he didn't have, was that sense of community, help him try to have something to get up for, something to go. And the nicest thing I loved was when their members didn't show up, a member would call them. And if a member didn't show up the next day, somebody would be knocking on their doors. And as a mom, having eyes on your child and someone you love with this disease means everything in the world. You can get them sometimes, we could get them to the services, but just having eyes on them and just having them have a life. And I want to just thank y'all.
Can I say something to that?
Sure.
That's something that we focused on these past 2 years. We formed a group called the Association for the Chronically Mentally Ill in Arizona. And I totally agree with Irene. There are some individuals, and we see them from our vantage point in Arizona. Right now, we have robust AOT laws. We have obviously more housing than you have in Louisiana and some other states. But we still had this population that was continuing to use up most of the resources, recycling in and out. I'm continuing to hear horror stories from families, and I'm thinking, how can this be? We've got all these things in place. One of the failures, if there's only one fatal failure of Arnold versus Sarnes, is that they put a stop on, or a limit on how many beds could be used at the state hospital. And for our county, which is the largest county in Arizona, it's 55 beds are available. And we found that these people that really needed to be in the state hospital, the psychiatrists, they're frustrated because they're holding people in their hospitals longer than they should, but they care about them. They have nowhere to put them. So there was this gap, even with all of these robust crisis centers, and it was kind of like a triage system. It still is a triage system, in my opinion. And so that's why we started focusing on the lighthouse model, which is the congregate, because of the rent is going through the roof. In Arizona, our housing prices are astronomical. It's impossible to afford a house. But we thought, okay, 4 or 5 people in a house with 24-hour staff is still going to save money. And then we also still saw this gap. They can't be in the hospital. They can't live even with 24-hour staff. There was this group still here. And so that's why we piloted this year a secured residential setting where the courts could see somebody who is failing in the criminal justice system. They have repeated hospitalizations. They could be ordered into a residential facility, and they still have the same rights as AOT, but they have to stay there. And they have to stay there until two psychiatrists look at them and say, they're ready to step down. And hopefully we've got more lighthouses to where they could step down to see if they can be there. So that's why I think a focus on this smaller group here that we keep We keep saying, oh, let's focus on this big group here. This small group is eating up all these resources. This small group is suffering in just inhumane ways. And we've got to acknowledge this. I have no problem saying AOT works. I have no problem with involuntary treatment because my son's alive because of it. I've seen so many success stories. I think right now in Arizona we have about 2,200 people in our county on AOT.
Yeah, approximately
2,200 people that are currently on court-ordered treatment in our county, and it's working. So I could go on about this.
Okay, I have one more question for Dr. Mike. Can you tell us about your experience here in New Orleans and Katrina?
Oh, yeah, I had a chance to meet some of your, I guess, familiar faces because I don't know how long ago Katrina was. Was it 10 years? 2005. How many?
2005.
2005, almost
14 years.
14 years. I was working for the Department of Health, and to evacuate, we brought quite a few of your folks on planes to Arizona at our convention center, which, you know, I guess there were 400 or 500 people, you know, in cots and things like that. And very quickly, we recognized that quite a few of the folks had mental health issues. Many had looked like untreated mental health issues for a long time. And so we set up a mental health clinic. We set up a mini residential location. And some people were very paranoid to be in a setting like that with 500 people, so we had to find places that they could be to feel safe. And it was an unusual experience. There were, you know, people were in that tragic, you know, traumatic kind of event, and it was good that we could be there. And eventually the governor said, you got to close this down because we got to have our state fair. But
And you sent them back?
we sent them back, but it was months before we had to do that. So,
Well, I'm
but
sure
some
you-
of them stayed, some folks stayed.
I'm sure your efforts made a big difference here, so thank you very much. And that concludes our housing panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. Thank you all. And that concludes our conference. So again, I want to welcome you all to come to our reception afterward at the Pythian Market on Rampart Street. You should have received an RSVP or an invitation to RSVP. If not, let me know and I'll give you the address. Please fill in the evaluation forms. You can leave them outside. There's a table outside the door. And this, you know, it's funny because we started planning this conference about 6 months ago, right, in June, however many months ago that was. And it just seemed like it was so much work to get to this point. But actually, this was the easy part. The hard work is tomorrow. The hard work is capturing this information. The hard work is processing the materials and harnessing the energy in this room and moving it and channeling it into something that we can make tangible in terms of changing our policies and changing the way that funding is redirected or is directed so that we can create this continuum of psychiatric care for people with serious mental illnesses that we all care so deeply about. Once again, also want to thank the Hoff family, Jennifer Hoff, who was incredibly generous in helping to sponsor this event, and our other sponsors who are named in the booklet. I think that's about it. I'm Janet Hayes. Thank you so much. That you don't know how much that means to me. You can follow us on our website, healingmindsnola.org, and we'll be in touch.